the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling through.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Golden Age of Cricket podcast, a series where we explore the lives, careers and statistics of those cricketers who flourished during the quarter century before the First World War. My name is Tom Ford.
The good old summertime. To swim in the pool.
The outbreak of the war in 1914 drew a curtain on competitive international cricket and very much closed the window on what had been a sparkling period for the sport, a period of unprecedented performance, press coverage and character. Many first-class cricketers signed up to the war effort and never returned, or for some were left with crippling career-ending injuries. A number of Golden Age cricketers were lucky enough to play international cricket after the war, most famously Warwick Armstrong, Wilfred Rhodes, Warren Bardsley and Jack Hobbs. One member, perhaps best remembered today for his swashbuckling batting feats in the 1920s, was Charlie Macartney, who first shone as a dashing, confident young all-rounder during the Edwardian period. And it's this early part of his career which is the subject of today's podcast. Today, I welcome my first ever returning guest, having helped me launch the podcast when he discussed his then freshly written biography on Monty Noble. Peter Lloyd has now produced an equally informative and well-researched book on Macartney, titled Charlie Macartney, Mayhem and Artistry. Of particular note is his focus on many areas of Macartney's life which previous biographers have either missed or chosen to avoid, and to which I look forward to discussing with him in the course of our chat. Peter, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the fact that I'm your first returning guest. Um, I may have been your first original guinea pig, but some of your subsequent guests have been ever so eloquent and informative about their own works. Little wonder that your series was acknowledged in the award season in your first year. What a smorgasbord of great golden ages you've already got in the can, so to speak. I'd really encourage those listeners who haven't done so already to dip back and have a look at your back numbers, so to speak.
Thank you, Peter. That's very kind of you. And like I said, it's very nice to have you back and to be turning our attention to another one of your subjects, like I said. Now, it's not the first biography ever written on Charlie Macartney. So, as a biographer, were you confident going into the research process that you would have something new to say, or did that become apparent after the research began?
When I wrote my first Golden Age biography on Warren Bardsley back in 2021, I pointed out at the time that his cricketing deeds, let alone his life, had never been addressed in any longer form essay, despite his undoubted sporting calibre. Many of his contemporaries had been the subject of some distinguished authors, but I knew from the get go that Charlie Macartney's story had been poorly managed by his first biographer in 2004. Uh, it was a rather shallow, narrow, and at times prefabricated account, totally unfulfilling and inadequate, and I knew that Charlie deserved more. I'm sure you'll appreciate this, Tom, and agree. Rigorous research is half the fun of the exercise of discovery and exposition. Scholarly inquiry entails finding primary evidence of some description or another, and ideally being able to point to at least two substantiating sources for further confirmation. My particular style of writing, not liked by everyone, I admit, is to provide the reader with immediate access to sources I've used to stake a claim. Footnotes, I think, are far superior to endnotes. Sometimes they point the reader to an important source. Other times they suggest an extension to the primary focus that isn't part of the main game but still of interest. So it can be very frustrating when an author makes sweeping statements about a particular incident or behavioural characteristic without any attempt to support their contention. So, for example, and without wanting to disparage the work of the late Greg Growden, he was a fine writer and an excellent recorder and analyst. Greg did suggest that McCartney's state of mental health was damaged by his experience at the front during the Great War. I happen to agree with what he wrote in his award winning 2019 book, Cricketers at War, about Charlie's war neuroses. But Greg provided nothing in the way of documentary evidence to support his claims.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on McCartney's battles with mental health shortly in the podcast. But Peter, as you write in your book, McCartney's own autobiography, which was titled My Cricketing Days, provides very little in the way of personal information. So, again, as a biographer, what difficulties did you have to overcome in relation to the availability of resources?
Yeah, Charlie's own account of his cricketing life was carefully constructed and chummy. Perhaps it was crafted in tandem with his very astute and classically educated wife, Nan. It was understandably far from revelationary about his inner self. It wasn't really an autobiography. I believed, and so it proved, that there was much more to uncover about the Governor General, both on and off the field. However, I never set out to write a behemoth of a book. I'm sure that there are very few cricketing tomes about one individual of over 700 pages in length. In modern times, I can think of just two, Steve Waugh and Ricky Ponting's autobiographies, but those two, especially Ricky's, didn't reveal very much personal detail. I guess the bottom line is that Charlie wouldn't let me off easily. Initially, he was unwilling to share, but after 12 months of intimacy, so to speak, he knew that this was likely to be his last chance to not, if not set the record straight, at least to reveal a lot about the less well known aspects of his life beyond cricket. Plus, he seemed to be telling me that he was keen to have his aggressive approach to cricket, with both bat and ball, brought to the attention of modern fans of the game. His many meritorious deeds in the middle have been largely forgotten over the decades. Charlie was far from a vain person, but he championed the notion of always taking the game to the opposition.
Hmm. And I just have to add, Peter, because you mentioned it there in your answer, that for anyone coming to Charlie McCartney for the first time, the Governor General was his nickname. We are not referring to some higher office here. I'm hoping in the course of this discussion, you might perhaps explain where that nickname comes from,
I shall.
because it has been his nickname ever since, basically, from his playing days, and people still, as you did, refer to him such. Um, Peter, in terms of research, were there any descendants of McCartney who were able to assist you in the research for your book?
Charlie married later in life and to an older woman. They didn't have any children, but as Nan, his wife, was always saying they had a lot of fun together, travelling, socialising, watching cricket, and playing golf, amongst other activities. Charlie's elder brother Harold also remained childless, as did younger sibling Clara, who never married and who died in 1983 at the age of 94. There are very distant descendants of Charlie's mother, Mary Ann Moore, daughter of the renowned colonial cricketer George Moore, a bit more of him later perhaps, who are still living in New South Wales Hunter region, that is in the Newcastle and surrounding areas, but none of them with any genuine link, close link to Charlie. In 1994, when the Hunter District Cricket Association acknowledged McCartney as a Hunter Hall of Famer, the award was accepted by local cricket identity and regional historian Lindsay Wood, who's written one of the two forewords to this biography. I was fortunate to have access through Cricket New South Wales Library to several of McCartney's scrapbook albums, which he alone, and then later in tandem with his wife, maintained throughout his long career. There were many items in one of the albums in particular which opened up interesting avenues of inquiry beyond cricket. After I'd finished writing the book, I had a series of email correspondence conversations, I should say, with David Frith in England. David had read about the biography in an issue of the Cricket Memorabilia Society journal, and he was keen for me to know that when he was a young lad living in Sydney, he had been introduced to Charlie at Bert Oldfield's sports depot on Hunter Street in the city. He described Charlie as being very reserved. Much later, in the 1970s, he'd visited Clara um, at Belton, the old family home in Muttimer Road, Artarmon, on Sydney's lower North Shore. She was a charming petite woman, according to David, fully alert in her late 80s at the time, and she had much to relate about family matters. As David was leaving, she gave him Charlie's 1909 Ashes Tour album. I would love to have had access to that source. Anyway, I sent David a copy of the book, and he's currently writing a review of it for the Cricketer magazine, which I'm looking forward to receiving in due course.
Yeah, very nice. And I know many of my listeners will, of course, know the preeminence of David's writing and where he sits
He sits
in
right at the pinnacle.
he
Yes,
does
indeed.
sit right at the pinnacle, and we're very lucky to have him. Now, Peter, as I mentioned at the top of this podcast, Charlie is one of a handful of international cricketers who transcended the First World War. That is, he played for his country both before and after. Like many fans, I first came to know Charlie Macartney's cricketing feats from after the First World War, when he was an elder statesman, and records. Well, I remember reading about his famous 170 against England, I think in 1920-21, which was made even more famous when Don Bradman referenced that innings as he was in the crowd that day as a 12-year-old, and I think inspired him to pursue cricket. But in many ways, Charlie Macartney's pre-war career, that falls within the so-called Golden Age, uh, is somewhat overlooked. Is that a fair claim?
I think it certainly is a factor. I mean, I see what you're getting at. This podcast series is all about the golden age. So there's absolutely no doubt that McCartney was the world's preeminent cricketer in the early to mid 1920s. His evolution to that exalted status has been poorly described. Uh, I've, I've gone to great lengths in the book to promote the view that his emergence as a stellar cricketer was a combination of innate talent and a lot of genuine hard yakka. Um, Perhaps a recap to explain. Charlie was definitely a teenage prodigy when he first made his first class debut in November 1905 in Brisbane at the age of 19, and then his test debut in the Ashes series in December 1907. Initially, he was selected for both New South Wales and Australia as a bowling all rounder. During the 07-08 series, which Australia won 4 matches to 1, he batted in all 10 Australian innings up and down the order, opening on 3 occasions, at first dropped twice, then at numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8. His average of 27.3 seems fairly pedestrian, but he had a hand in several important partnerships. The series was dominated by the bowlers, Jack Crawford, Arthur Fielder, and Sydney Barnes for England, and Jack Saunders in particular for Australia. Only Englishman George Gunn averaged more than 50 in the series. Charlie chipped in with 10 wickets at a shade over 26 runs per wicket. Arthur Jones's side saw plenty of Charlie during this tour. Apart from playing in all 5 tests, he met them on the field for New South Wales on 2 other occasions and for an Australian 11 in Brisbane immediately before the first test. I'm sure you're aware, Tom, as would be many of your listeners, that it was Kenneth Hutchings, the outstanding Kent amateur batsman, who was killed in the Great War at the age of 34, who first labelled McCartney the Governor General during the series. I think the tag was created not only because of Charlie's swagger with the bat. He played 4 aggressive half-century innings in the 7 matches against England, or the MCC, during that tour, but also because of his ability to impose himself at the bowling crease with his controlled line and length. And also in the field, close to the bat on the offside, he had a very strong arm and an accurate throw. In short, he was always in the game, but this was an especially strong Australian 11, Trumper, Hill, Noble, Armstrong, Cotter, and Saunders. They were all dominant at different stages of the series, but nevertheless, Charlie was a solid contributor. Despite his performances in 1907-08, he didn't consider himself a certainty for the Tour of England in 1909. But of course, Monty Noble, who wasn't a test selector, but who was still enormously influential, would never have allowed the squad to leave Australian shores without Charlie being a member of the party. In England in 1909, Macartney had a modest batting tour record, coming in down the order. It took him a good while to acclimatise to foreign conditions, despite practising on a waterlogged pitch in Victor Trumper's backyard at Gordon. Charlie did post two excellent half centuries in the fourth and fifth tests during the 1909 tour, as his appreciation of how to handle sticky or slow English wickets improved. With the ball, two inspired spells of bowling, 7 for 58 and 4 for 27, on a conducive pitch, virtually won Australia the vital third test at Leeds when the series was even at one apiece going into that match. Sydney Pardon in Wisden made much of Charlie's control and guile. Noble knew his worth and managed his workload astutely, unlike Sid Gregory during the Triangular Tour of 1912, who really overbowled Charlie. And of course, beyond all of that, his fielding was always inspirational. And then in 1910-11, Macartney had a series of low scores in the first three tests against the visiting South Africans, 15 runs coming in 5 innings, and he was dropped for the first time in his career for the fourth test. He regained his form. Charlie described it rather as breaking his run of bad luck, with two sparkling centuries for the state against the tourists, which forced the selectors to recall him. So he rewarded them and everybody looking on when he hammered his maiden test ton at Sydney, chanceless 137 in 193 minutes with 16 fours. Thank you, Tom Webster. Um, Charlie was surprisingly not picked for the first four tests of 1911-12 against Plum Warner's Victoria side. He was 12th man for the first three tests. He played in the fifth test only after Clem Hill, who had been supportive of his inclusion from the start, and influential others finally convinced New South Wales selector Frank Iredale and Victorian selector Peter McAllister to call him up. Macartney was discombobulated, if you like, by his omission, and he justifiably considered that the majority of the panel favoured players who had remained loyal to the Board of Control during the power struggle within Australian cricket. The wrangling of the Big Six matter made Australia's task of competing against England more difficult than it needed to be. There was just the one more international program for Australia before the First World War, with the 1912 three-pronged triangular tournament. Macartney and Warren Bardsley were Australia's outstanding performers across the tournament. So Charlie was pleased with his efforts, and if I could quote from his autobiography, which, with due respect, focuses almost completely on his cricketing activities, very little to do with things off the field.
Mm.
So he says that year, 1912, ended my run of bad luck, and I was never in doubt again regarding my position in a Test side right up to the end of my career. I made over 2,000 runs for that tour, finishing second to Warren Bardsley in the batting and leading with the averages for the bowling with about 50 wickets. I was not called on to bowl for some time after the tour commenced, but owing to an injury to Bill Whitty, Sid Gregory asked me to take a turn now and again. Um, Looking at statistics, at this point in his career in the pre-Great War era, Charlie batted on 34 occasions without a not-out score for 879 runs. I know you're quite keen on ensuring that statistics get a look in
Yes.
when in your chats. His average was 25.85 with a higher score of the 137 against South Africa at Sydney in 1910-11. That was his sole Test ton to date, while he had 6 half centuries to his name, including 99 at Lord's versus England in 1912, an innings that which his dismissal still has a degree of controversy about it. After the resumption of Test cricket in 2021, he batted in a further 21 innings compared to the 34 before the war, um, with the four not out scores for a total of 1,252 runs at an average of 73.65, almost Bradman like, and with the highest score of 170, the one you mentioned earlier, against England in Sydney. That was an innings for all to behold, as you suggest. It energised Don Bradman. Um, so in the post-war, First World War period, he scored a further 6 Test centuries and 3 half-centuries, with a conversion rate that was significantly superior to that which occurred in his pre-war uh, uh, career. So to answer your Tom, sorry if I was a bit long-winded, but Charlie's performances during the first phase of his top-flight career were mixed. He was inconsistent with the bat, but he was up against several very fine bowlers. By 1912, I think he'd hit his straps, and had it not been for the war intervening, he would have ensured his international reputation much earlier than he did.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Peter. And I'm really glad that you've broken down his pre-war and post-war statistics like that. As you mentioned, we will be looking at his overall statistics later in the podcast. And I think for someone like Charlie Macartney, it is important to separate the two periods because as you've already alluded, at the beginning he was very much an all-rounder and he was used in various ways and he was in and out of the side compared to post-war where he very much was the almost the doyen of the Australian cricket side, and he's found a lot more consistency with his batting in particular. So we'll talk more about his career, about his statistics later on in the chat. But it might be worth now turning our attention to his actual life and his early life. I actually want to begin talking about his mental health, which we've already referenced in this chat. And it's something which you've given quite a bit of attention to in your book. Um, he had 4 separate periods away from cricket during his career, which, owing to the time and the age, wasn't fully explained at the time. So, can you take us through how you made the link with these periods away from cricket with his mental health?
Yeah, mental health is certainly at the core of my account of McCartney's life, including its impact on his cricketing career. I've estimated, and this doesn't include the lost war years, that Charlie missed out on playing in over 50 top flight cricket matches due to his inherent mental health condition, which I consider is best described as an extreme example of anxiety disorder. His 4 lengthy periods of absence from the crease are going to be addressed individually, I think, as the podcast proceeds, so I won't go into the particulars here. But just to say, though, that while his experience of war exacerbated his mental health frailties, these were very apparent as early as 1909.
I'm singing me, Charlie, you're the boy for me.
So, Charlie Macartney was born in Maitland, New South Wales, in June 1886. And the Moore side of the family, that is his mother's side, had a very strong connection to cricket, which included a couple of Charlie's ancestors even playing against an All England side in the 1860s. Peter, what can you tell us about Charlie's cricketing pedigree?
So I emphasise throughout the book how the Moore family linkage played a significant part in formulating and fomenting Charlie's love of cricket. Grandfather George Moore and great uncle Jemmy Moore, Jemmy Moore, both played organised cricket in Bedfordshire, England, before migrating separately to Australia in the mid 19th century, and then establishing themselves in the thriving commercial township of Maitland in the Hunter region of New South Wales. At that point, Maitland was perhaps the second most vigorous commercial centre in New South Wales, behind only Sydney. The skills and the knowledge of cricket that they brought to the township and to the area, the district, lifted the standard of sport, cricket, to the point where the combined local side was at least the equal of several visiting teams from the Big Smoke, where the sport was taken very seriously indeed. One such 11 was the Redfern based Albert Club, regarded widely as the pace setters in Sydney club cricket. Both George and Jemmy went on to play, as you say, for New South Wales colonial sides, often comprising 18 or 22 players, against several visiting teams from the mother country. So I'm talking about H. Stevenson's 11 of 1862, George Parr's side of 1863-64, and W.G. Grace's team in 1873-74. As well, they played in several intercolonial matches for New South Wales against Victoria. Two of Jemmy's sons, Leon and William, also played first class cricket for New South Wales. William also represented Western Australia. George played his final first class match at Sydney's Albert Ground at the age of 53. So I was also keen to establish whether Charlie's father, Joseph Belton Macartney, JB Macartney, played cricket at some level. With the help of Lindsay Wood, I mentioned before, we were able to find just two references to JB in the local newspaper, the Maitland Mercury, which, by the way, is an excellent resource for early sporting and artistic doings in the Hunter area. It was a model of a newspaper that many other regional areas could look up to with a great deal of pride, I guess. We were able to find that JB played social cricket, but only twice. And one of those occasions, he played alongside his father in law, George, but without any great distinction. So there was a solid vein of gold, if you like, in the heritage from his mother's side of the family.
Yes, predominantly in the Moore side. That's Moore. But despite, well, not despite, perhaps because of that strong upbringing, it gives him this tremendous foundation in the skills and art of playing cricket. But then in 1898, so when Charlie is age 12, the Macartney family leave Maitland and they head to the Big Smoke in Sydney. What impact did this have on Charlie, both socially, but perhaps more pertinently to this podcast, to his cricketing development?
So there was no organised junior cricket in Maitland until after the JB McCartneys left the rural hub. Settling in Sydney's inner eastern suburb of Woollahra, there was a lot of green space for playing all sorts of games then, as now, and for wagging school in the process. Uh, uh, Charlie played school cricket for Woollahra Superior Public School and later for Fort Street Model School. However, the particulars of his early schoolboy deeds on the field are scant. He also played for a congregational church social side in a Saturday afternoon Queen's Park open age competition. He was short in stature, but with unbounded enthusiasm. And I asked rhetorically in the biography whether any of his adult teammates in the church side may have recognised him as his elite career unfolded. For many of them, it would likely have been their closest connection to cricketing royalty.
Mm, yeah. And his development continued on. So 3 years after the family moved to Sydney, Woollahra, as you say, which is in the sort of southeastern suburbs of Sydney, the family again moves, this time in 1901, to the North Shore suburb of Chatswood. Um, and if anyone does know Sydney, Woollahra to Chatswood is not a short distance, and certainly not in 1901. It would have been even further. What specifically happened to Charlie's cricket form upon moving to Chatswood?
So the move to Chatswood was a commercial decision by JB Macartney, who, in his entrepreneurial manner, he was a very uh, savvy businessman. He saw opportunities to grow his myriad of businesses in a sparsely developed area of the sprawling metropolis. But for Charlie, it meant a new school and proximity to what would become the epicenter of his entire cricketing life, Chatswood Oval, a ground that would witness many of his outstanding, occasionally outlandish performances, but far different in the early 20th century than what it would become in a relatively few short years. At school, Macartney continued to prefer games to classroom instruction, and he performed well enough to provoke some attention from the press, and at the same time, he caught the eye of Monty Noble, but his schooling days were soon over.
Mm. And I have to jump in there, Peter, and say that until a short time ago, I would catch the train every day to work and past Chatswood Oval. And the train goes over just past the Oval, and it's a very pretty looking field. In an otherwise pretty bland trip into the city, I would always look down on that cricketing field and wonder at the legends, and we might touch on them later. Those who have also played on that field. It's a very famous ground on the North Shore.
So the route the train line ran exactly the same as the one now, except of course steam engines rather than the
Mm,
electric trains. I think the journey was quite pleasant.
mm,
Not so much because of I think in the early part of the 20th century, some of the less salubrious aspects of urbanisation hadn't yet encroached, so a lot of bushland between stations.
mm. Well, and now you've got the recently launched metro, which leaves Chatswood and goes underground at some huge speed, and you completely bypass the oval. So if you're wanting to see the oval, catch the train, the old traditional train into the city, and you'll get this beautiful view of the ground. Anyway, we
Yes, indeed.
digress. So Peter, in 1902-03, we're heading now towards his late teenage years. He makes his debut for the club North Sydney, and he takes no wickets for 14 runs, bowling his slow left arm spin. And he bats at number 11, and he makes 12 runs. Um, at this point in time, can you tell us, was he primarily a bowler or a batsman, or possibly both?
So Charlie took great pride in noting that he never played any form of junior cricket at all. When he was 16, having left school, he worked as a clerk for a shipping company at the Sussex Street docks in the bustling heart of Sydney's CBD. And he joined the North Sydney District Club in 1902-03, as you say, because he was required to do that if he wanted to play grade cricket, given the Sydney electoral qualification rules introduced in 1893-94. Members of the North Sydney Club were and remain known as the Shoremen due to the closeness of the North Sydney Oval to the harbour. At that time, North Sydney was the only grade club on the north side of Sydney Harbour. 2 seasons in the lower grades at a club with a solid core of first class cricketers saw him on his way. By the end of the 1904-05 season, he was a regular member of the first grade 11, which won the premiership that year in a canter. Um, so he saw himself as an all rounder. Uh, I think the selectors at North Sydney also noticed that he had capabilities with both bat and ball, as well as his fielding attributes, which were phenomenal.
Mm. And it's interesting. I mean, McCartney's just another one of a group of golden ages, if we can term them as such, whom today we look on as batsmen or bowlers, but primarily as batsmen, and we completely forget that they also bowled. I mean, Trumper was another one who was quite a fine bowler, but all we hear about these days with Victor is his batting. Gilbert Jessup was another one. He was a bowler, but we only hear about his rather rapid batting style. So McCartney certainly at this point in time and well into uh, the start of his career, very much was a batting and bowling all rounder.
He was. He opened the batting and the bowling for Gordon as the club evolved most weekends
Mm, yeah.
and successfully. Yeah.
Yes. Um, so, Peter, the progressive expansion of electoral cricket in Sydney, which had begun in the 1893-94 season, saw the birth of the Gordon Cricket Club in 1905-06. And this was somewhat unusual in that the club did not have to prove its calibre through sustained performances at lower grade level to gain entry to the competition. Um, Charlie qualified for the newly formed club, and he bowled their very first ball, in fact, and took their very first wicket. This is for the Gordon Cricket Club. And it was the beginning of a very, very long and successful career for the club. This, what can you tell us about his long association with Gordon Cricket Club?
So Gordon was one of two clubs introduced to Sydney first grade competition in 1905, 106, uh, with Macartney's home in Artarmon being smack bang in the middle of Gordon's catchment area. Charlie, with a few other senior North Sydney players, was obliged to change allegiances, and that's where he would remain for the next 22 seasons. During the Great War, the competition was suspended for 3 years, and his last season of grade cricket was 1933-34.
Mm. Um, and I know we'll touch on Gordon again throughout the course of this discussion because it was one of the great constants in his life. Now, it might be appropriate at this point in time, Peter, to actually, to the best of your ability, describe Charlie's batting and bowling style. We've already mentioned, I think, when he first started bowling, he was bowling slow left arm spin, but how would you describe both his batting and his bowling styles to a modern audience?
Looking at his batting first, perhaps in his early lower tier and representative years, he was a fairly orthodox batsman, notwithstanding the fact that he had an enormous first pace towards the ball, which would be a hallmark of his entire career. Many people marvelled at how he could maintain his balance. What cinema footage exists, and in the book I show readers how to access that, it was a remarkable feat. He also quickly mastered the art of moving across the crease to the off to manoeuvre balls to wherever he chose. His hand eye coordination was incredible, and he could pick up the length of the ball in a twinkle. A bit like the Indian wicketkeeper Pant. He seems to have,
Mm,
watching him yesterday play, he had a lot more time facing extremely good bowling than his colleagues, and
mm,
Charlie was in the same mould. As far as bowling was concerned, he was extremely economical. He learnt a lot from his grandfather George Moore, and he also learnt a lot from observing Hugh Trumbull in the 1902 series. He learnt how to be. He learnt what control bowling was really about. He had a cleverly disguised faster ball. You're right in saying that he bowled slow, but there were occasions when he bowled more of a slow medium uh, ball, which reached the batsman before they were through with their stroke. Uh, he could make the ball he could propel the ball more rapidly without changing his style, without changing his arm motion. So at grade level, he was lethal, regardless of the pitch conditions. At representative level, confronted by more capable batsmen, he needed conducive pitch and atmospheric conditions to help him gain an advantage. However, his control of line and length was always impeccable, and he often amazed critics at how he could contain even the most dashing of batsmen. Some of the English more aggressive batsmen, and I'm thinking of CB Fry
mm-hmm,
and Jessup. Uh,
mm,
Charlie could maintain a line and length which made uh, caused them to struggle to be too aggressive against him.
I appreciate your uh, comparison of his batting with India's Pant. For modern listeners, is there a modern bowler you could compare him to, or is that hard considering it's sort of a style of bowling from 100 years ago, which possibly doesn't exist now?
Um, Being a left-handed bowler, I'd say that perhaps
Hmm.
Jadeja from India also. He's in the eye at the moment, of course. Similar in his capacity to be able to land the ball on a handkerchief, as the common
Mm, yes.
description goes these days. Jadeja, I think, doesn't turn the ball significantly, but it's his line and length and nagging accuracy that causes some havoc with batting. And I think Charlie had that same approach. Uh, Charlie would be probably a lesser bowler than Jadeja, but a much more vigorous batsman.
Mm,
But both good
yeah.
all rounders, definitely.
Play with toys and daddy, daddy, I want to fight. Just let your boot with all my might. I'll be Johnny on the spot, firing out the winning shot. Now, daddy, I want to go.
So back to his development as a young cricketer, he makes his first class debut against Queensland in November of 1905, and he hits 56, batting at number 8. And not too long after that, he then makes his Sheffield Shield debut in December, so a month later, playing against South Australia at the Adelaide Oval. And in this match, he strikes 70, not out, batting at number 7. So, again, can I ask, was he selected for these matches as a bowler, a batsman, or both?
I think he was fundamentally a bowling all rounder. I don't think he was too fussed about how he was actually perceived by selectors. He just loved all aspect of play and was eager to perform to help his team's cause. So he didn't mind being pushed up and down the order. I think he felt that the better captains could appreciate the fact that he would be able to offer some substance with both bat and ball, and was quite happy to be manipulated around on the crease, in the crease, batting crease, and on the bowling crease.
Mm, yeah. Um, and again, it's sort of becoming apparent that he's having this fairly rapid rise. So shortly after, again, he makes his debut in his first international match in a what's described as a semi-test. It's not a formal test match. Again in Queensland against the touring English of the 1907-08 season. And this time he opens the batting, which I think was the first time ever. And it's under the leadership of Peter McAllister, someone who's already been mentioned and will be mentioned again, no doubt, later in the podcast. So how did he perform in this semi-test?
I hadn't actually made that distinction between the two home and away matches he played for New South Wales against the MCC immediately prior to the Australian 11 match at the Gabba in early December 1907. I'm not quite sure that's technically correct, but it's an interesting matter, and I think Ray Webster certainly classifies the game as just another first class fixture, although he does refer to the semi test character of the encounter in line with contemporary newspaper reports. Regardless, Charlie was on show and batting in front of Victorian selector McAllister. He batted with a great deal of freedom, hitting 42 an even time with 4 fours against tight bowling before being caught and bowled by slow medium leg spinner Len Brown, who achieved the figures of 7 for 117 off 22.5 overs. Charlie was then given 16 overs after 3 others had been tried and finished with the best figures of 4 for 36 with 6 maidens. His victims were Joe Hardstaff Jr., Brond, Wilfred Rhodes, all very capable batsmen and all being bowled, and Colin Blythe. The 3 day match was washed out, but Charlie had certainly done enough to ensure selection in the first Test side a week later.
And yes, he is selected in that first Test match of the 1907-08 series, and is very much utilised as an all-rounder. His debut was described by one newspaper as highly credible, and it was a 2-wicket victory to Australia. How do you assess his official international debut?
So the first test of the 07-08 series was indeed in the firmament for 5 days of play. At the end of the match, Tibby Cotter was the standout performer with bat and ball. However, the indefatigable fast right armer Arthur Fielder bowled magnificently in both Australian innings, taking 6 for 82 and 3 for 88 with very tight overs. He had all the batsmen at sea with his off cutters and outswingers, even first innings top scorer Clem Hill. I'm sure that'll impress you, Tom. But Arthur was still bowling express pace when Charlie came to the wicket at the fall of the fifth wicket on the second day with the score on 184 in reply to England's total of 273. When he joined Vernon Ransford, also on debut, he looked a class act, unlike the earlier batsmen. And I quote here from the journalist known as Recorder. I wish I knew his real name. The pseudonym is apt. He had a very good eye to the history of the noble game, a little like Jack Davis of the referee and Arrow. He wrote in the Sydney Sportsman newspaper, and on the 18th of December 1907, he claimed that, unlike most of his comrades, Macartney has a splendid method of coping with the off theory. Instead of maintaining his primary stance at the wicket and reaching across for the ball, he takes a short step with his right leg, bringing the left up very quickly. He's thus enabled to get the full force of the bat on the ball, for he uses his left arm in a perfect manner, reminding one very much of the old writer's description of Silver Billy Beldam, probably the equal of W.G. Grace as a batsman, and certainly one of the greatest batsmen of his or any age. There were several journalists writing in the Sydney press who had this historic bent, who wanted to uh, cast current players in the light of a tradition of batting, and Recorder was one such reporter.
Mm.
Um, this He was a reporter who could look back at a passage with some pride because he captured something about Macartney that would become a feature of his career, of his entire career. Um, uh, these were hallmark qualities of Charlie that Recorder noticed. Charlie was out for 35 when he felt for one of Fielder's enticers and was caught behind by wicketkeeper Dick Young. So, as you suggest, Tom, this innings was summed up by Recorder as highly credible, with Charlie, and I quote again, displaying any amount of nerve. He then bowled 14 overs in England's second innings for figures of 1 for 39, his initial test victim being Wilfred Rhodes, who was batting at the top of the order. Charlie was also applauded for his fielding, with his returns to the wicket being described as brilliant. All in all, a fine beginning to his test career.
Yeah, very much so. And he's really chosen a fantastic series to enter the international arena, because it's these early matches are quite exciting. With the second Test match, which then heads down to Melbourne, is equally, if not of greater excitement. This time, England reverses the result with a one wicket victory after Hazlitt's missed throw at the stumps to tie the match gives them the final result. But again, what can you tell us about Charlie Macartney's contribution to this match?
So Monty Noble, skipper, chose to promote McCartney to open the Australian first innings with Trumper. That must have been such a thrill for the youngster. He and Vic combined in a forceful partnership of 84 and 81 minutes on the first morning before the senior man was caught at the wicket off Jack Crawford for 49. Charlie at that stage was 34 not out when they went to lunch. And he added just three more before being bowled by Crawford um, for 37, which he compiled in 90 minutes, hitting just the one boundary. The Australian score of 266 was below par on a good wicket. England replied with 382. Hutchings scored 100, a brilliant 126. Cotter and Saunders did most of the bowling and took the bulk of the wickets. Charlie had 12 overs and conceded 34 runs without taking a wicket. In the second Australian innings, Noble took strike at the top of the order with Trumper to good effect, the pair wiping out the deficit and putting on 126 for the first wicket. Macartney, batting at number 6, did well again, scoring 54 in 147 minutes with 5 fours. It was described as a plucky and sound innings at a critical time. As you noted, with Australia posting 397, England scraped through to win the test by the single wicket with a final unbroken partnership of 39 between Barnes and Fielder. Charlie bowled 9 tight overs at sixth change for 21 runs and took the wicket of Hutchings, caught by Cotter.
I probably speak for maybe some listeners out there that if there was ever a chance to hop in a time machine and see a one session of Test cricket, I think watching Victor Trumper and Charlie Macartney walk out to open the batting for Australia would probably be up there at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. I think that would have been quite special.
I agree totally.